Assalamu alaikum. My name is F.S. Aijazuddin, and it's my pleasure to introduce former Governor, Mr. Shahid Hamid, and his book, Precious Moments, Memories. Mr. Shahid Hamid's career has run the gamut of the alphabet from A, B, C, D to G. He's been an advocate, he's been a bureaucrat, he's been a caretaker, minister, and he's been a minister of defense for our country. And he's ended a distinguished career in public service as governor of the Punjab, our most populous province. The biographer Lytton Strachey once said, "It's perhaps as difficult to write a good life as it is to live one." So Shahid Bhai, since you've done both, you've lived a life and you've written about it, which was the more difficult?
Well, first of all, Ijaz, after that introduction, that glowing introduction, when I write the second edition, if there is a second edition, I'll include your introduction as part of my treasured memories. But this is my first venture into writing, and it came about because when the pandemic took hold here, my three daughters, they confined me and my wife to the home and said, "Don't move out of there." So with not too much to do, I thought I may as well take a hand in writing a record of the daily events and recalling the life spent. And particularly, I wanted to write for my grandkids, because I thought, what do they know, if anything, of the first 50 years of my life? And when I shared it with them, they said, why don't you put it together in the book? And that's how this book, Treasured Memories, has emerged. And after I wrote it, I found that that's not the end of the story. You would know that more than anyone else. I think you've written more than a dozen books. So I had the problem of editing it. And they helped enormously. My wife, my daughters, my grandson, and then the printers. And in this book, which is really anecdotal, it's a series of stories that I remember from my childhood till now. And in this book, I've also included about 60 pages of pictures of my family, of the family memories, their travel memories, their memories, of course, of the times that I was the federal minister for defense law and establishment and of governor of the Punjab, and subsequent events.
What kind of influence do you think, enduring influence, did Cambridge have on you as a person and as an academic, as in time, a politician?
Although I went on to study law, I'm a barrister at law, and I went to the Honorable Society of the Inner Temple to be called to the bar. But in Cambridge University, all 3 years I studied economics tripos. And I have a degree in economics. And then subsequently, I got the MA also. Oh, there are so many memories, so many friends made there. It's a different world, really. And, the different world is in the sense, Ajaz, that unlike, unfortunately, in some of our education institutions, even in universities, there is a lot of rote learning, nothing of the sort, not even in public school and certainly not at the university. They sort of instill in you the concept of original thinking, think it out. They bring it out in you. And that is something that then I think takes you right through life. And the other aspect of it is that, and that's later on why I also sent all my 3 daughters to public school there and to universities there, it gives you enormous self-confidence. You feel that, okay, I can take on whatever comes in later life. That's not to say that academic success in any way guarantees you success in later life, but certainly it gives you the self-confidence in yourself to face later life.
Now, you mentioned your father and the fact that he moved in, he went into diplomacy and was appointed as an ambassador. And I think you were a first-hand witness to a number of important assignments that he had, for example, in Iran. And then when your mother, who was a very elegant presence in our embassies abroad, she had the opportunity of meeting the Queen of Thailand. Perhaps you'd like to show us some of the pictures relating to that?
He was ambassador for a total of 14 years. Mm-hmm. And he was posted in 5 different places with the concurrent accreditation to neighboring countries. He was in Thailand, then he was in Beirut, then he was in Algeria, then he was in Italy and Rome, and finally in Iran, and that's where he retired. And yes, I have wonderful memories of all those places. I think the enduring memories that I would like to share with you is, first, let me just share a picture of my mother. This is with Queen Sirikit. She accompanied the king and Queen Sirikit on a royal visit to Pakistan. And then I'll show you a picture of my father. He is presenting his credentials to the Shah of Iran. This was the glory days of Arya Meher, the Shah. But really, the memory I want to share with you is neither of these, but of Lebanon, of Beirut. And the reason why I say Beirut more than any of the other locations, they were all wonderful, was because he was concurrently accredited to Jordan. And Jordan at that time included the West Bank. And one traveled with him, and later on, one of my very senior colleagues at the bar, Mr. A.K. Brohi, came with us, and he also wanted to go there, and I accompanied him for a week to the West Bank and prayed in Masjid al-Aqsa. We went to Hebron, we went to Galilee, we went all along the River Jordan. It was just incredible to see all those places, really. And I can never forgive the late King Hussein for getting involved in that war and losing it all.
Well, it was a crucible of our faith in many ways, because yes, belonging to the Semitic Abrahamic tradition, all of the places yes, that today are associated with the Judaism, with Christianity, and with Islam, in fact, are there. And so you were privileged and lucky to be able to see them at a time before politics had set in. You mentioned then coming back from Cambridge, and you, instead of going in for law, you then thought you'd try your hand at the CSP. And you joined them, I think, in 1963, and you became part of what was known as the magical batch of 1964. Would you like to talk about that?
Well, actually, the batch of 1964. Yeah. And of course, the most, without question, the most distinguished member of the 1964 batch was Sardar Farooq Ahmad Khan Nagari, who became the president of Pakistan. But it included a number of others who rose to high office, not including myself. And they include Ishrat Hussain, Dr. Ishrat Hussain, who was in the World Bank, then later governor of the State Bank of Pakistan, and today he's the federal advisor. It included Mr. Moin Afzal, who was Secretary General Finance. Practically all my batchmates, Shamsher Ali Khan, who was Secretary to the President, also with the rank of Secretary General. Mr. Saeed Delvi, his father was in the Foreign Service. He also joined the Foreign Service. He was our ambassador to a number of countries. Later on, he was the head here in Pakistan of the Aga Khan Foundation.
And Mr. Sherdil.
Farooq Subhan yeah, was from Bangladesh. Right. He was their foreign secretary, and later on he was the state minister over there. So all my batchmates rose to high office, and I think they all served their country very well indeed.
You mentioned Farooq Subhan, and of course, for people who don't know, he was a close colleague and advisor to Sheikh Mujibur Rahman in East Pakistan. You spent your early years of service in East Pakistan. What is your recollection of it? And you mentioned it in detail in your book, but it would be interesting to hear what your take was on your service in East Pakistan.
Yes, Farooq Subhan actually had an elder brother, by the name of Rahman Subhan.
Rahman Subhan, sorry, yes.
Was the one who was an economic advisor, finance advisor to Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, and also I think was one of those who formulated the 6-point program for Sheikh Rahman. I served in East Pakistan for 2 years, from 1967 to 69. I was there when Yahya Khan imposed martial law in the country, and there for 6 months afterwards. And then I came back towards the end of 69. And one of the first things I did after I came back was to marry Sarwat. But in East Pakistan itself, I served at a place called Gopalganj, and Gopalganj was the home subdivision of late Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. And that's where I met him, in fact, because I was his escort when he was given parole to visit, pay a one-day call to his ailing mother at a village called Tungipara. And I was with him from Khulna up to Tungipara. I was a civilian escort. East Pakistan, what can one say? They were very patriotic. It's not true at all that from day one they wanted to be a separate country. No, they did not. But they felt that they had legitimate grievances. Their grievances were like this: look, we are 10 million more than the whole of West Pakistan, but the development budget is divided 50-50. All the defense expenditures, or 95% of the defense expenditures, are in West Pakistan. And we are told that the defense of East Pakistan lies in West Pakistan, not in East Pakistan. And there are no countervailing expenditures there. In addition to this, the Indus Basin works, they are kept out of the purview of the 50-50 division on the ground that these are replacement works. But if they are replacement works, what about including the flood protection works in West Pakistan, in East Pakistan, also out of the defense? So, these things grew, and this was part of the 6-point program. And that 6-point program essentially envisaged a confederal Pakistan, not a separate Bangladesh, but a confederal Pakistan. And eventually, when Sheikh Mujibur Rahman won that overwhelming victory, electoral victory in 1970, we did not respect that decision. And there was that savage military crackdown. Really, it became when the rest of the world did not support us, including our allies, the United States of America. Separation really became inevitable.
Well, Henry Kissinger described the relationship between East Pakistan and West Pakistan as being a tragedy ordained by history. So it was geographically, I think, in defense, it was not possible to defend half of our country, which was 1,000 miles across hostile territory. But let me move quickly to your, you came back, you got married.
Indeed.
Yes, and you've had...
We have celebrated, well, this month we'll be celebrating 51 years.
Indeed, Mubarak Hodi. And you mentioned that you've had a wonderful relationship, but then you went one step further and you said, not only wonderful, but wonderful, wonderful relationship. And there's this lovely anecdote in there where, obviously in the context of our domestic imperatives, you had restricted meetings with Sarwat before you got married, but then you sit across the table and she smiles at you and you smile back at her. And that's when you know that you want to marry her. It's, smiling across a crowded room, as it were, in this case, a crowded table. You came back and then you joined the Lahore Secretariat, which is the provincial government here, and then became the secretary to Chief Minister Hanif Rameh. It was a challenging task, I suppose, because Hanif Rameh had this kind of love-hate relationship with the Prime Minister, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. What were the specific things that you remember about that secretaryship to the Chief Minister?
You know, he was Hanif Rameh, the late Hanif Rameh was quite a remarkable person. He was the first from any of the political parties. He was the first person with a middle-class background, urban middle-class background, to rise to the highest office in the province. He was installed. He replaced Mustafa Khar, and no prime minister in this country, especially coming from a province other than the Punjab, wants a chief minister in the Punjab who is a dominant personality. And originally, Mr. Rameh was installed, I think, to replace Khar, who was proving a little troublesome, Sher-e-Punjab and all that, to sort of take orders from Islam. But he flowered in his own right. He was a remarkable orator. He was very hardworking. You know, we used to sit, he used to give me time at 10:30 at night. From 10:30 at night till midnight, sometimes till 12:30, 1 o'clock, 1:30, we'd be going through all the files of that day, recording his orders. And in the mornings, he would be up first thing in the morning in his office, holding meetings, traveling, and scrupulously honest. His net worth when he finally left office was probably less.
Minus.
Than when he joined.
Minus.
So he served the country with dignity and honor.
In between all this, he was also a prolific painter. He was one of the first, first persons who experimented, like Shakir Ali and Sadiq, experimented with calligraphy in color. And there's a whole body of work.
And you know, he was also the chief editor of the daily Musawat.
Yes.
And he was the inspiration, incidentally, behind the construction of the Alhambra Arts Complex.
You've devoted a whole chapter to Sardar Farooq Laghari, who was our president, and we share something in common. I was at Aijazuddin College with him. We were in the same class. And I envied him. Obviously, he was the son of a Sardar. His father had been traveling to the United States on the Queen Mary, etc. But unlike you, I never reached the heights. You did. And you served, in fact, with him, and then subsequently as caretaker prime minister to be, but then you became the caretaker defense minister. Would you, since you have devoted a whole chapter to him, would you like to discuss your relationship with him and what your own reaction was, the kind of changes that he wished to implement as president?
Well, he was, of course, after he left, well, first of all, I met him, when we were in university. We were same. I was 3 years in Cambridge, same 3 years he was in Oxford. But on a number of occasions, we got together, exchanged visits between the universities. Then, of course, we were together in the civil service 1964 batch. And we were together the same 2 years that I served in East Pakistan. He also served there in East Pakistan. And then later on, you know, the family, I mean, his wife was in Parda, but she became great friends with mine. So there was a family relationship also grew up between us. And he resigned about the same, well, a little before I did. He resigned from the civil service when his father died, and he was installed as the Sardar of the tribe. And he joined the Pakistan People's Party, and in due course became the Secretary General of the party. And then I looked after quite a lot of his legal problems when I started practice. And then in 1993, he became the president. He was elected the president of Pakistan. And I, in fact, was one of those who participated in his campaign. And he said that I don't have an official legal advisor in the presidency, but you are to be available to me at all times to be giving me legal advice. And that became very necessary when differences developed between him and the Prime Minister, Benazir Bhutto. And those problems over time became worse and worse. And one of the reasons why those problems arose was actually involved the judiciary, because at about that time, the Supreme Court took a decision in the Al-Jihad trust case, which was not to the liking of Muhtarama Benazir Bhutto and her advisors, which laid down very stringent conditions on basis of which judges were to be appointed. And one of my memories of that time is that she called on him and said, just look at this Sajjad Ali Shah, who is the Chief Justice of the country. I appointed him as Chief Justice, superseding two others. And now he's sitting on this bench giving decisions against me. And this should be conveyed to him. So Farooq Ali called me and said, she came and she wants this message to be conveyed. So I said, okay. So he said, you are to convey it? I said, me? You want me to go to the Chief Justice with a message like this? So he said, yes, he knows our relationship. So when you go there, he'll be quite sure about its authenticity. So with utmost reluctance and kind of fearing the worst, I took an appointment with the Chief Justice. And as soon as I went in, I said, my lord, you are not allowed to shoot the messenger. I'm only a messenger. So he laughed and he said, all right, sit down. And what is the message? So I told him. So then he became very stern. And he said, go back and tell your president to tell his prime minister that she appointed the Chief Justice of Pakistan and not her Khansama. So, well, strong words. This was one of the incidents that finally led to the, dissolution in 1997. But worse than this was that when Murtaza Bhutto was assassinated in Karachi, the first few speeches that Prime Minister made seemed, in fact, not seemed, were a deliberate attack on the presidency, implying that the presidency, along with state agencies, were responsible for his murder. And that was crossing the Rubicon, if I can use that, that from Julius Caesar's times. That was the breaking point. And I think that was the breaking point for the Army High Command also, that state agencies were being blamed for that murder. And then I was asked to study the material and write out that order exercising the powers of the presidency under Article 58 to be of the Constitution.
Correct.
Yeah, and dismissing her government and dissolving the assembly.
Following the dissolution of Benazir's government, then there was a caretaker government, and you were tipped to become the caretaker prime minister. And instead, Miraj Khalid Saab was appointed. You took the consolation prize of the Minister for Defense. And I think this was, without exaggerating, this is probably the most productive period of the civil-military relationship that has oscillated over the years, up and down, but it's probably the most productive and happy period. How do you regard your relationship with as a civilian, with the military, and I'm including here the Army, Navy, and the Air Force, and perhaps you might like to show a picture of yourself with the three chiefs and the chiefs, Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Yes, I'll do that. I just want to tell you about this business of the prime ministership, that as soon as he signed the order, the late Shamsher Ali Khan, who was the secretary, this is I'm defense minister and the service chiefs on my left, Jahangir Karamat, then on further down, Abbas Khatak, the air chief, to my right, the chairman, joint chiefs of staff, and then on the extreme left of the picture, Admiral Mansoor al-Haq. But as soon as the order was signed by the president, Shamsher said that Shahid should be the caretaker prime minister. So he looked at me, he was very clear on this, that the caretaker powers should be exercised by him, the president of Pakistan. Mm-hmm. So he said to me that I can't make you prime minister because I don't think that would work. But I'll be happy to, in effect, appoint someone whom you can work with. And you are then to exercise the prime ministerial powers. So I said, all right, if that's what you want, then you would have to make me, number one, the defense minister. Because the support of the armed forces, the army chief in particular, is crucial for the continuation and the effectiveness of the caretaker government. And you'll also have to give me the establishment division in my charge, because normally it's the prime minister who controls establishment, and that gives you control over the civil bureaucracy. And in due course, after Fakhruddin resigned, Fakhruddin Ibrahim, I was also given the law ministry, so I had 3 separate ministries. And it was in that capacity, actually, that you can say I was the sort of de facto senior minister in the government. Mm-hmm. And Miraj Khalid, of course, was a delightful person. I mean, I always regarded him as my elder brother, and very, very sweet. And he also realized what the score was. So we got along very well indeed, both during that caretaker period and afterwards. But the caretaker period was, I think, a very productive period. I'll come back to the armed forces in a minute, but let me tell you that during that period, we passed as many as 51 laws, 51. Mm-hmm. And 35 of them, about 70%, were converted into permanent acts of parliament by the subsequent incoming government of Mian Nawaz Sharif.
Can I move now quickly to your position as the governor? You were then invited to become the governor of the Punjab, which is our most populous province. And you were able to you had 22 universities under your control, 4 or 5 special schools. But as governor of Punjab, there were a host of mundane responsibilities, but also the rather glamorous guests that you were able to host during your time. I'm thinking of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, who came in 1997, and she was accompanied by Sarwat, your wife, who was in fact, the equivalent of a minister in waiting, and did so very elegantly because I was a witness to it. And then, of course, Mr. Vajpayee's visit, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, the Prime Minister of India. It was a very crucial time because the Lahore Declaration was, in many ways, a challenge, both for the Indian government to show, as Vajpayee had proved, that they accepted the reality of Pakistan. And he did this at the Pakistani Monument and then again at the speech at Governor's House. But it was a tricky visit. And I'd be grateful if you could just recall, one was, of course, the visit of Her Majesty the Queen, which was more ceremonial than actual substantial, and the one of Mr. Vajpayee, which was, as I've said, far more substantial than it was ceremonial. So perhaps you might like to discuss these two.
Okay, let me first show you one more picture, and that is of Majesty the Queen. Here we are coming down the stairs of Governor's House. The Duke is in the background, and the 3 of us are in front. This was on the way to the fort for the banquet given by the Prime Minister at the time. She was here on a 6-day visit, and Sarwat, as you mentioned, was her lady in waiting, so she accompanied her from the time she landed right up to the time she took off. And I must recall that during that visit, 2 people were decorated by her. In fact, 3. One was David Dane, who was the High Commissioner, became a great friend then and later, and he was knighted. And the second person who was decorated was your relative, Sayyid Babar Ali. And most importantly of all, the third person, to my delight, who was decorated was you, Mr. Fakir.
I remember it well.
that was a very treasured memory that you were decorated by her during that stay. She was quite remarkable, very, very easy to talk to. She put you at ease. And you know how much care was taken in planning for her visit. A whole palace team came some months earlier, and they went over her program literally minute by minute. And they asked for the pictures and biodata, not simply of myself, Sarwat and others, down to the guard, the butler, every member of the staff who she would be in touch with. And she was able to greet each one by name. You see, in Kargil, amongst others, I was one of those sent to the United States of America to talk to their media, to talk to their think tanks, to convince, and to the UK also, to meet their parliamentarians and congressmen, to convince them of our story. And that was that the Mujahideen had occupied the heights in Kargil. And of course, just before that, or in fact, during the course of that visit, the G8 had met, and the G8 countries had issued a declaration that Pakistan was to withdraw. And while I was there, being the ranking Pakistani around, I was called in by the State Department, by their Assistant Secretary of State for South Asia, who was later also one of those aides present with Clinton when Nawaz Sharif went to, on the 4th of July to Washington, and read out an ultimatum. And basically, it said that you have to withdraw. We don't care whether they're Mujahideen or your regular soldiers. You can put whatever spin on it you like, but you have to withdraw. And if you don't, it will have grave consequences. And this was on the 27th of June. And while he was giving this ultimatum, he was saying that right at this moment that I'm reading this, General Zinni, who was the CENTCOM commander, he's meeting General Musharraf, and he's saying exactly the same thing, word for word, he's delivering this message. So they wanted to make sure that this message was, and they weren't sure whether General Musharraf would convey it to the Prime Minister. As it happened, Musharraf immediately got him to say the same things to the Prime Minister directly. And so I sent the cipher message, but even before I think he received my cipher message, the message had gone. And so on the 27th of June, there was no question but that we had to withdraw.
Indeed.
The entire world, led by the United States, had lined up against us.
Now, I'm afraid I'd love to continue talking to you, but I think we're bound by the limitations of time. You've written this wonderfully evocative book. It's a narrative of your life, treasured memories. Which one of them, out of all of them that you've compressed into this book, which one of them do you treasure most?
Of all the treasured memories?
Why not?
Well, unfortunately, I haven't taken out that picture for showing to all of you, but without question, the most treasured memory is 21st of February, 1970, on the date that I married my wife.
Brilliant. And which is the memory for the remainder of your life, and you've mentioned here the lengthening summer as being the concluding chapter of your book. God grant that your summer lengthens and never sees an autumn. But which unfulfilled desire is there in your life?
Unfulfilled desire really is that we should develop greater tolerance in our society. We should, tolerance is not merely at the religious level, there also, but we seem to be, instead of developing tolerance, we seem to be traveling in the reverse direction. That's not to say that we are the only country. Currently, you could say that in the United States, there are more intolerance between the Democrats and Republicans than anywhere else. And that's true of a number of other countries. But forget them. We have to talk about Pakistan. And it's really very sad. It's really very sad when you see them day in, day out in the newspapers and the media and jalsas accusing each other in very deplorable language. And I have said at the end of my book that I am an optimist and Pakistan will prosper. I'm sure that Pakistan will prosper. But the journey is going to be very long, very arduous.
One word of advice for your grandchildren, what would that be?
This is what I got from my grandfather and from my father, that whoever comes to you, forget what's in it for you. If you think his case is genuine, and sometimes even if you think that you may not be that genuine, do good to others. That's a sacred religious duty. And this was something that I learned directly from my grandfather when he was alive and said, that at times you must be.
I'm not your grandchild, although I wish I was. I'm not your grandchild, but I think they could do well. They could do well to keep your book, Treasured Memories, by their bedside and refer to it every evening before they go to sleep and read it every morning when they wake up. My compliments to you on a wonderful book and also on being available today for this Virtual LLF 2021. Thank you so much indeed, Governor Hamid.
Thank you. Thank you so much.